Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're watching us from. On the behalf of Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement and Water Policy Center, it gives me immense pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, Chair Dr. Deepa Rohit Kamat, speakers, participants who registered for the event. Today is the third and the last day of the conference, which was inaugurated on 29th August 2020 by Mr. Pradeep Gyawali, Foreign Minister of Nepal, and Dr. Abdullah Rashid Ahmed, State Minister of Maldives, and other high dignitaries. We have around 150 experts and speakers joining us from 30 different countries who have been delivering their presentation and sharing their expertise with us. This is the 25th session of the conference. And to chair and moderate this session, it's a real pleasure to have Dr. Deepa Rohit Kamat with us today. Introducing her, Dr. Deepa Rohit Kamat is a self-motivated, passionate, and an amiable academician with more than 10 years of teaching experience, along with 5 years of corporate experience, with an excellent track record of teaching and mentoring abilities. She has been a Mumbai University approved teacher since November 2011 in the area of marketing management. She is currently serving as an assistant professor at Prin Ellen Welingkar Institute of Management Development and Research, Mumbai, India. It's a great pleasure to have all you on board. We're looking forward to hear each one of you sharing your experience and your expertise on your areas of field. Thank you for being here, and we're looking forward to each one of you.
Thank you, Shreya. It was a gracious introduction that you have given. I'm really honored to have this introduction. And before we begin with the session, I just thought I'll put across few pointers. And sir, if it is allowed, can I just put across few pointers?
Sure, ma'am, of course.
Okay, so all of us are going through pandemic and the world economy itself is shrinking. Like the IMF has predicted that possibly our economy is going to shrink, global economy, by almost 3%, and which is possibly the steepest slowdown that we could have ever had after the Great Depression of 1930s. Some of the major things that we see today is oil is no longer fueling growth. Industrial production is going down, mass unemployment and huge migration crisis that we see. We have had a discretionary income consumption going down, and of course, strained global relationships. So with this background, and because my forte comes from consumer behavior, I'll just put across 4 important pointers as the psychological changes that we consumers all across globe are going through. The first pointer talks about suraksha, which is a Sanskrit word for safety. Today, consumers have become conscious of health and hygiene. And globally, therefore, we see the increase in spends on health and hygiene to almost like 35%, being highest with USA, 43%. Second pointer and the second part of our consumer psychology is called as a sannigdha, which is more of like uncertainty, high level of uncertainty, unpredictability, and therefore people do not want to travel, which will definitely impact our tourism industry as a whole. And it is predicted that almost like 75 million people will be losing their jobs in travel and tourism by 2020. And European industries, countries by large will get a loss of almost like 80 billion in revenue from tourism and travel industry. So it's like a significant impact in these global industries. Third pointer for today that I thought I can share with you and you can ponder upon is called as a udvignata, which is more of an anxiety and stress that all of us are going through. So because consumers are going through this stress, leading to a higher rate of possibly suicidal attempts, and also the mental health will become more important in coming days. So we as a community has to do something to address this mental problems that may come arise in few days time. Last and most important is, although we are into all negativity surrounded, we're talking about Ashwasan, which is talking about optimism and positivity. At core of it, all of us across all different continents, be it US, be it India, be it Nepal, all of us are optimists of going back to our new normal and being again a part of the economic growth which we would like to see. And thus, some of the organizations have also looked at pandemic as opportunity of creative disruptions. And I would also like to put across our Indian government's policy, which is talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is more focusing on self-reliance as well. So I'm sure some of these pointers will be discussed in detail with respect to global challenges and opportunities. And I really look forward for a lot of learning and lot of insights through these presentations. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I must congratulate NICE and WPC for such a lovely conference. I mean, it's credible to get participation all across globe and having panelists or chairperson from again like different facets of life, be it diplomat, academician, or maybe the government officials. It's really lovely. Thank you so much. And we can move ahead with sir.
Ma'am, the session is all yours. You may take it forward with the speakers.
Okay, okay. So we have the first presenter as Dr. Paul, or should we start with Bansari Kamdar?
Yes, ma'am. Please start with her. First speaker joining in few minutes. Please
Sure,
start.
So Bansari, all the best and look forward to good presentation from you.
Thank you so much, Deepa, ma'am. You've been very kind. It's interesting because your talk gave me a good segue into what I'm going to be talking about. As you said, like oil is no longer fueling the economy. What we're seeing is that it is care work, unpaid and paid care work, which is fueling the economy. And so I wanted to talk about COVID-19 and its effect on female labor force in India. And I could just share the screen. Is the screen visible?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, that's absolutely visible.
All right, thank you. So my name is Bansari Kamdar, and I am an independent journalist who writes on South Asia policy, gender, and immigration. And I'm also an applied economics student at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. I'm going to be talking about India's declining female labor force participation and how it will be impacted by COVID-19, and also what policy measures need to be urgently taken so that like we don't have more leakage in female workforce. I put a table of contents slide just to give a flow of how I'm going to go about it. So first, I'm going to talk about about what was the pre-COVID situation, the effect of COVID. There's just again, like COVID-19 is such a developing story. There have not been as many studies on it, but there are some preliminary studies which are showing disturbing results. Then I'm going to be talking about what some theories are around why India has one of the lowest female labor force participations in the world. And then some of the policy measures that can be taken, particularly at this time, to make sure that it doesn't decrease further. So with that, I am going to move ahead to the next slide. 4 out of 5 women in India are out of the labor force. This is based on the data by World Bank. That means that India is in the bottom 10 of the female labor force participation rates in the world. Only 7 countries have it worse than India. And it's not always been this way. It's something that has happened in the last 15 years. We have seen a decline of 10 percentage points, so around like 30% in the last 15 years. 1 in 3 women left the labor market in the last 15 years. And it's also much worse in some states. Like there's a lot of different aspects to it. Like there's a greater decline in rural labor force female labor force participation than in urban female labor force participation. It's different in some states where like you don't see as much of decline, but in some northern states you see the female labor force participation falling below 10%, where which is again a cause of great worry. There's also even before COVID, like because of the unemployment crisis that was already there, even before COVID, women were the worst affected in that unemployment crisis pre-COVID. So while the overall unemployment rate was at 7%, before India instituted a lockdown, it was already as high as 18% for women. What we're seeing now is that it gets even worse. People are predicting a worldwide recession. And again, like there's some academics already calling it a she-cession in India, where a greater proportion of women are losing jobs than men. 4 out of 10 women who were working before the lockdown was instituted, before COVID-19, left the workforce, or like lost their jobs during this time in March and April. And while the unemployment rate has steadily climbed up, women have not been able to get employment as easily as men. We have that based on like some preliminary studies that are done. Ashwini Deshpande has written a working paper based on the CMI survey, which talks about how women are affected by this. We see that women who were employed pre-lockdown, she sees that women who were employed pre-lockdown are 20 percentage points less likely than men to be employed in April. And this is just something, again, like COVID-19 is such a developing story. We don't know what final impact it will have on women and how we will combat it. So this is just something that we're seeing, trends that we are starting to see. There's another study that Shiny Chakraborty yesterday mentioned in EPW, which talks about a study done by the Institute of Social Studies Trust of 176 informal workers in Delhi, which shows that they experience an 83% income drop, severe income drop. Their household chores increased by 66%, and their elder and childcare responsibilities increased by 36%. We're going to see ahead why care is going to play a major role in why women are leaving the workforce. So next I wanted to talk about, there's been this, again, this sort of paradox. A lot of people have what we're seeing is that women with no education and women with tertiary education are actually have the highest levels of labor force participation, but this women with just secondary education or moderately educated women are leaving the workforce. And there's been multiple theories to explain it. It's because the paradox is so complex, like there's not one theory of everything. So what I'm just going to do is like list out like some of the ideas that are there. And see how that's going to impact further with what's happening with COVID. So on the supply side, there is an ILO study finds that 62%, it might be 62% responsible for it. There's a lack of jobs for moderately educated women. There's crowding out in occupations, there's occupational segregation. A lot of these things lead to women not getting enough jobs. Also, the economic growth in recent years has not been labor intensive, and women are usually in informal labor intensive occupations like agriculture, domestic services, and other similar occupations. There's also a strong household income effect, which basically means that as household income increases, it enables women to leave the workforce to pursue domestic work, and a lot of times like leave arduous workforce, arduous labor, which is like a lot of like stressful labor, to pursue domestic work. That is not just because of the household income, but that's also a cultural aspect, where another like survey done in 2016 showed that 40 to 60% of men and women in rural and urban areas believe that if a married woman whose husband earns a good income should not work outside the house. And this is a very recent survey. So we've seen that the cultural norms have not shifted. And again, like you could also look at the NSS, like which is the last NSS survey, which was done in 2011, 2012, which shows that like 90% of women who were not primarily engaged in work were like primarily working, doing domestic duties. Of these women, 92% said that they were pursuing domestic duties because they were required to do so. Of these 92%, 3 out of 5 said that they did that because no other member would carry out the same duties. Women are disproportionately responsible for the unpaid work in the household. There is the last time you survey done by India was in 1998, 1999. But even that showed like that women do 4.47 hours of unpaid work over like 0.88 for men. A recent OECD survey showed that women perform nearly 6 hours of unpaid work every day compared to just 52 minutes by men. The good news though, with COVID-19, which I do want to bring out because you talked about the positive aspects, is that men are taking up, like the Ashwini Deshpande's study found that men are increasing their household chores during this time. And that is a positive that has come out of it. But overall, women are still bearing the larger brunt of unpaid work inside the household. This causes a sort of time poverty where women do not have the time to pursue paid work. Past epidemics, past research has shown that with epidemics like H1N1, with Ebola, as women's childcare burden increases, they'll decide to leave the workforce or like cut back their hours. Which is because, and we are also seeing that partly because like schools are closed. So once schools are closed, the children are home, women cannot even pursue part-time work or other paid work, full-time paid work. Next, again, like women's work inside the house, it's not that women are not working. That's the thing, right? Like that's the basic concept, is that it's just that women's work is not valued. Women's work is not counted. Women's work is not counted in the labor market. So there's been like some issues with the ways these surveys are also calculated, where they don't accurately measure women's work. So a part of like the argument about like the female labor force participation rate is, how do you accurately calculate men's work so that you don't, maybe the decline is not as much as what is visible in the graph that we first saw, because the surveys don't accurately capture what women do as their secondary activities, or what women or even the interviewers don't count as women's activities. So for example, that women might consider milking the cow as something, a part of their domestic duty, but that is something that can be potentially marketable and thus economic in nature, and thus should be counted as work in many ways. There's an interesting working paper by Bidisha Mondal, Jayati Ghosh, Shaini Chakrabarti, and Sona Mitra, which argues the same thing, that domestic duties, secondary activities, and women's other paid but unrecognized work should be counted because it is potentially marketable and thus economic. And when this is counted along with market work, the drop in the female labor force participation is no longer as evident. In fact, we see a shift from paid to unpaid work, which is still worrying, but what we're seeing is that women are leaving workforce to pursue unpaid work inside the house. And we need to see other reasons of why this could be so. One of them is, again, like as we discussed earlier, the supply and demand, where there are not enough jobs for educated women. There is cultural restrictions to women's mobility. Then there is also the idea of occupational segregation, where women are highly overrepresented in low value industries, where their wages do not increase, the productivity is low. They're also highly engaged in informal markets, which are going to be one of the worst affected with COVID-19. There's already, like, ILO estimates that 400 million people in India are at risk of poverty because of this, because of the informal markets and the lack of public provision, public security net. Other than that, like, so for example, with occupational segregation, CAPSOS finds this very interesting dynamic that, like, women took up less than just from 2004 to 2010, not sure about that one, but like till 2010, like women took up less than 19% of the new employment opportunities generated in India's 10 fastest growing occupations. And this is again, like this explains why a lot of women are like in occupations which are low paying and precarious by nature. There's also legal limitations to women's work in India. So there's a Factories Act, which does not allow women to work in factories overnight, with section 66(1)(b) of the Factories Act of 1948. This limits the occupations that women can work in, and also the like a lot of, and Ashmita Gupta finds that like during periods of liberalization, that was one of the reasons why women were not involved in a lot of these industries, the fastest growing industries at that time. So that is again like a big limitation to women's work. There are other factors like women earn, like the gender wage gap basically, where women earn between 35% and 85% of what men earn, depending just on their type of work and the level of education. India has an Equal Remuneration Act, but the gender wage gap continues to persist in India. The ERA is like, or more than 40, like nearly 40 years, more than 40 years old. It's in 1976. So what we're seeing is that despite that the gender wage gap persists, there's also a high risk of assault and unsafe work environment in India, which discourages women from entering the labor market in the first place. And that is despite you have legal provisions against it. You have discrimination laws, you have harassment policies, but most companies are even unaware of these policies. And what is worse is that with COVID-19, some states are suspending the existing labor laws, which would hold employees accountable for something like providing safe working conditions, providing adequate lighting, providing transport for night shifts, overtime, food, safety, security, water. States like UP are also suspending, states like Uttar Pradesh are also suspending Equal Remuneration Act, maternity benefits for women. The suspension of laws like this makes it even tougher for women to enter the workforce or even stay in the workforce, because it endangers it not just reduces the gender, like the wage parity, but also endangers their safety in workplace environments. So these were just some ideas that I had for policies ahead. Again, like as I said, when I started, like this is something that is developing. So we need to talk about, but it's also an urgent situation. India is not only facing a public health crisis, but also a severe economic crisis, which is disproportionately affecting its women. So these are some of the ideas, like, and we can debate and talk about these. So one of the policy ideas that I was thinking of was increasing the gender budget for programs targeting women, which right now is below 1% of India's GDP. There's a lot of programs that are helping women, but there needs to be a greater budget allocation, because we're seeing already that women are leaving the workforce. You can also have, we need to address this gender wage discrimination through education and enforcement of the laws that are already there, and making sure that these laws protecting workers are not removed. There's also like increase in public works programs and safety, and increasing safety nets for women, which have shown positive impact around the world, right? Like public provision of daycare facilities in other parts of the world have shown that it incentivizes women to enter the workplace, because it takes some part of their unpaid work burden and reduces it. Similarly, like investments in social infrastructure like water and electricity that we're seeing need to be sped up so that it reduces women's unpaid work burden. Other than that, you could have expansion of programs that are already there. So for example, the MNREGA, which could be, Rangarajan and Dev talk about expanding it from 100 to 150 days, which would increase rural employment. Because once again, like the highest amount of female labor force participation decline is in rural areas. So there needs to be policies that actively target rural women and actively provide employment to them. And lastly, like as many of you know, there's been this there's been this discussion about ASHA workers, and I thought I wanted to include that also in it, and talk about how they're fighting for job recognition, minimum wage pay, and VP. A lot of occupations that women are involved in are similar, where like they're informal and they don't have the provisions, the legal provisions, legal safety nets, and those need to be included. So one of the ways we could do that is like start slow with something like ASHA workers who have been vital in helping India combat COVID and providing them with basic job recognition, higher pay, like minimum wage pay, not even higher pay, just the minimum wage pay that we provide, and safety equipment. So that's the end of it.
Okay, great. Yeah. Very good presentation, Ms. Bansari Kamdar. It's absolutely, I mean, eye-opening and thought-provoking for all of us. When we look at India, perhaps, as you rightly pointed out, it's a nation of paradoxes. And one way we have like late Sushma Swaraj ji and Nirmala Sitaraman heading the important portfolios of India. And we have the best of the entrepreneurs like Ms. Kiran Majumdar Shah. And the other end, we have like a huge paradox of a lot of learned and highly qualified women moving out of the workforce and getting into a domestic responsibilities. So that's a real good trend that you pointed out. I just want to add a few more things and want you to ponder upon is, do you feel that it's a what could be the reasons, like maybe the highly qualified women also shifting from their highly paid jobs to looking forward to something like a domestic responsibility?
Again, like it would be tough to sum it all up. Like there has to be multiple reasons. There's culture impediments, there is limited mobility, and there's also like, and there's actually studies shown how that like how as income mobility increases, as income increases, there's a higher income effect where women, if they earn, if women, if education increases, so if your education increases, you marry into more prosperous families, and thus like, and because women's income is considered secondary always,
Yes.
and because it's also less because of the gender wage gap, the reason why it's considered secondary is because it's all interconnected.
Right.
So what you see is that these women then decide that rather than like go into a workplace which is unsafe, go into a workplace where I'm not going to be valued equally, go into a workplace where I may face other problems, I would rather stay back because you have that income, higher income. And then there's also like some studies which show emulation, like a sort of like, it has become a sort of symbol of class mobility, where as income increases for other classes, they also emulate the same behavior, but they're also doing the same thing where they're deciding that, okay, so because like higher educated women, good families, the women don't go to work, they're emulating the same behavior. And that is, again, that is just one of the reasons. I could go through all of the reasons I've said and let you connect it with the same. Okay. It doesn't matter what education, what income, what class, what caste women are coming from. They're leaving the workforce in great numbers.
Okay, Bansari, I'm going to cut you here and I'm going to ask you a second and possibly the last question for today is, now with COVID, I mean, although there's so much of negativity around, a lot of people have used it as an opportunity as well. All right. Do you see that possibly women can also use it? Because I know so many of us possibly have also used it because now they don't have to go out. They are at home and they can start up with some kind of small entrepreneurial ventures as well. So do you think that there is a possibility, like an opportunity in the dark cloud that we have today for Indian women?
No, there is obviously like opportunity, but then again, like there's also this sort of gap, right? Who gets to do that? You have women's responsibilities in the household have increased multifold. They do not, the issue then becomes about time. Do they even have that time? Because when they're care burden has increased. So you have children, they have to teach. You have elderly who are at risk, highest risk of this disease. And the amount of care required for that is even higher. So you have the care burden which is being raised. You also have their household responsibilities which have increased because families are staying in. And women, despite some improvement in men's share of the unpaid work, or the house burden, like household burden, the domestic burden, women are still disproportionately doing a majority of it. And we are seeing that it has increased for both, but for women even more than it was pre-COVID. So then, like, do you even have the time for it? Becomes a big issue. But yes, again, like the last normal was not working. We need a new normal, as you said.
Yeah.
What was pre-COVID was not working.
Right. So just to, I mean, it was a lovely presentation and a very good perspective that you have highlighted. So let's move ahead and with the next participant. We have Dr. Paul Rozario. Sir, can we start with your presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for accommodating me and adjusting the time schedule. Most kind of you. In fact, I'm so impressed the way you summarized the previous speaker's paper, and I'm really honored to be among such great scholars. Really humbling experience. So please bear with me. I'll just try to put my thoughts together on this topic of the impact of COVID-19 on trade. Specifically, it relates to world trade, and I will mention certain aspects related to India. And there are a set of points, and so I call them reflective comments. And you know, initially when I thought about this paper, it's almost commonsensical. The answer to the question, what is the impact of COVID-19 on trade? It's obviously like the impact of COVID-19 on everything else, which is extremely negative. But there are shades and there are areas in which COVID-19 actually has given lots of challenges and opportunities. And in some cases, actually, there's been a increase in the quantum of trade. But before I go into some points, so please bear with me if I'm going too fast, please let me know. The ideas which come to me on this topic is that the response, and I've seen some series of papers published by the ASEAN India Center and UNCTAD, etc., where they don't seem to address the fact that the whole globe seems to be gone into lockdown and massive panic reaction. And it seems, even in spite of all the logic and the scientific knowledge and expertise available, that this is some enormous great churning, and it's almost that the world, all the organizations, WTO, United Nations, everybody else except WHO making no noise about it, okay? And so as a result of which, even a supposedly nationalistic and smart idea such as Atmanirbhar is protectionist, okay? Because it gives people from the realist school of international relations, great confidence to say that, look at the world now, it's everybody taking care of themselves. It's a dog-eat-dog world. And in fact, things like during the crisis, the early part of it, the United States was bulldozing everybody else in terms of buying equipment and basic things like masks, out-competing, out-buying, and the whole power dynamics also comes into the situation. So when you look at the impact of COVID on trade, this international relations power dynamic also has played into it. And it's also unmistakable, even though it goes into the realm of conspiracy theory, that how China, the originator, supposed originator, alleged originator, has lesser number of deaths and infections. And the countries with the largest number of infections, the United States, Russia, India, like competitors if there is a power shift. And obviously, whether China takes over power, becomes the grand superpower it's aspiring to be, the power shifts or the power drifts, as a result of which, how they will impact the future of world trade, something which scholars must seriously look at. Uh, Now, before I go on to some aspects of what I put on my PowerPoint, some of the basic points which, in terms of statistics at the early part of the early phase of COVID, we found that in March 2020, the following statistics were put forward by the government of India, okay? Which is also basically restated by WTO. And I must admit that almost all the statistics which I'm giving is the majority of which comes from WTO reports, some of it from UNCTAD, and they largely don't contradict each other. And so they are a set of official statistics, whether they are the whole truth or the real truth, or there's some agenda to it. I'll probably give you a glimpse of it. Okay. So initially they said that India has a loss of 348 million. That was a long time back. Okay. And of which chemicals, textiles, and automotives were the main areas in which India would lose. Okay. But on the other hand, if you look at it, China, UNCTAD, just like the allegations about WHO, UNCTAD's references to China are almost sympathetic, to put it kindly. Okay. For example, it sees the whole COVID trade response in terms of what is happening in China and China's manufacturing industries. It says China has, and much of it is fact, is that China has a great advantage in producing things like precision instruments, machinery, automotive, and communication equipment. As a result of which, it was estimated as early as March 2020 that the European Union would lose $15.6 billion. United States would lose something like $6 billion, Japan $5 billion, South Korea $4 billion. I'm just approximating. So a whole host of trading partners of China and the rest of the world, UNCTAD said, would be impacted because China was closing up, or productivity or manufacturing was shut down because of the Chinese lockdown. And the point UNCTAD seems to be consistently making, and sometimes echoed also by WTO, is that you better be careful how you deal with China in the post-COVID situation or during the COVID situation, because the ripple effect is global. And the kind of tentacles of Chinese industries to all sorts of production processes across the world, what they call the value chain, is something which is unavoidable or inexplicable, and the world is, stuck with that. An area which I want to focus on is also trade costs. So what are the trade costs as a result of COVID-19? Generally, you may refer to costs just in terms of actual cost increase, or what happens to policy stances or policy postures. And, it's just like everybody is now the intellectual. Everybody has a trade policy reference as to how do you deal with the situation, okay? So governments have to be pretty nuanced and smart, because again, in trade policy, the costs are very heavy, because if you make the wrong move, it could have severe costs, okay? The areas or industries most affected, of course, obvious, travel and transport, because they're shut down. And the other important cost is, which adds to all the areas and industries which are affected, is the enormous uncertainty and unpredictability of the virus. More importantly, the uncertainty of government policy responses. For example, even if you look at India, I'm just giving an example, I'm not necessarily saying that it's an illustrative example. For example, the center took it on itself in the early phase, and then it's abdicated to the states. And even in lockdown 4, we're not clearly sure as to what exactly states are supposed to do, what is a containment zone, etc. Even though there's a greater clarity, but there's also associated uncertainty. And as a result of which, trade costs usually come in the form of the restrictive trade barriers. Okay, there are non-tariff barriers, tariff barriers, temporary barriers, and all of this has been estimated at very moderate estimate of about at least 10% of trade costs in all sectors. Okay, and in addition to which, there are fees or costs to be borne in terms of crossing borders. There's the cost of the lack of investment facilitation, the lack of IPR protection, because this is a crisis time, this is a disaster, and everything else comes secondary to the basic essential medical goods transports, okay? And the other cost is, inevitably, everybody is looking inward There's a kind of a global Atmanirbhar. Okay, so import facilitations become the order of the day. Okay, even though it's basically in vital medical products, but this is combined with trade restriction. There are border restrictions, so everything adds together and a kind of cumulatively hits very hard. And estimates say that the kind of trade restrictive practices and policies and measures, the impact is worse than what kind of crisis response was there during SARS or the Iraq war. And some people have said it's the worst crisis response in 100 years and so on and so forth. Okay, so there are high level uncertainty in terms of the trade costs. Okay. Now, excellent paper by ma'am. So I can't resist mentioning the impact of COVID-19 on trade restrictions, which affects women, because I'm from Sophia College for Women. Very briefly, women constitute a major portion of some sectors, okay, key sectors, especially manufacturing sectors, such as textiles, apparel, footwear, telecom products, and the sad part is that these very sectors are the largest affected or most affected due to COVID. Okay? And for example, in Bangladesh, it's estimated that 80% of the women, 80% of the workforce is women in ready-made garments and textiles. And as a result of which, their loss of their incomes ranges from 46% to 81%, and several of them have also lost jobs. Also in services, women outnumber men, and especially in services such as tourism and business travel. These are traded services, services which cross borders or are traded across the border. Okay. So women also constitute a large portion of the informal sector, and especially in developing and least developed countries. And just imagine the kind of impact trade restrictions will have on productivity, economy, and employment, and the women are going to bear the brunt of it. Okay. Of course, in this whole area of statistics, there are lies, bloody lies, and statistics, and a whole lot of obfuscation. Okay. For example, you'll find some very good studies done by Indian scholars, but there's no one single report of the Ministry of the Commerce or the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, and you have some really outrageously funny statistics. I'll just give you this. I'm not able to make sense of it. Okay. It says India's trade balance in July 2020 was 4.8 billion, whereas in July 2019, it was 13.43 billion, okay, which is a 64% decline. So that's a trade balance, which is a trade deficit. But the same Ministry of Commerce site says India has a trade deficit in services, which runs to the tune of $7 billion in June 2020. But we have an overall trade surplus. I mean, I can't imagine how you have a trade deficit in goods and services. And the overall trade surplus figure is that, and of course, they're trying to show that there's a reduction in July 2019-20, it was $33.5 billion. But the surplus declined in April to July 2020-21 to $14.6 billion. These are facts which are given to you, and find that there's a plentiful availability of facts, and they're all jostling beside each other. The point I want to make is, in terms of, I'll try to cover one issue if ma'am allows me the time, is that the impact of COVID-19 on trade is not about these data, okay? And I'll try to make my case. I do not know whether it's plausibly acceptable. So I would like to quote a very, or refer to, if you're interested, a person called Ray Dalio. He's basically an entrepreneur, a capitalist, a billionaire, but he warns or cautions, or he's making a theory, okay? And his theory is what I'm placing in the background. Maybe I'll have time to elaborate it later. He says that in the COVID-19 crisis, which is, he says, is very reminiscent or repetitive of historical crises and responses. He says you have to be very cautious as to how the whole world is going to come together to deal with this crisis, because if you don't watch it, you'll find that the same hierarchies or power structures will prevail. Okay, so the rich countries will handle the crisis as they're handling it well, and you've seen that New York has crossed the curve. Europe is now in safe zone, and they are doing this by a series of government measures which other countries cannot afford to, or if they start to do it, then they'll have to borrow heavily, which is basically says that you have to increase the tax, you have to spend more, and you have to print more. For all of this, you must have the basic backing, and sometimes you might do it ruthlessly because you're so obviously well resourced. So countries like India may try that route, but it may lead to a series of problems. But so, in fact, he becomes almost idealistic, and which is why he says that the world is likely to be fragmented if it remains as it is in this the kind of COVID response. We've never seen a more fragmented world. Countries internally, within states, everybody, even New York was complaining against Donald Trump. Tamil Nadu and West Bengal were complaining against central government. So the fragmentation is clear. Okay, there's not even regionalism. Even East Asian countries are, closing their borders, barring what is called as, will come to some kind of a trade bubbles existing between two countries with similar culture.
I'm sorry to cut you in between, but I think we have extended the time for your presentation. So if you want to, conclude it or take it to the culmination of your thoughts.
Yeah, just give me 1 minute, ma'am. So, in the one major area, apart from the other areas which COVID-19 impacts is trade and services, okay? And in trade and services, you have 4 modes in which trade services is traded, okay? One is you can do it online. So that's mode 1, which is you stay one place, the consumer stays in one place, the producer stays in another place. So there's no movement. But more and more of the trade which is impacted is what is requiring cross-border movement or commercial presence. Now that constitutes a large amount of services trade, and any economist will tell you in terms of the world has moved from a manufacturing industry world to a services-based world. And as much as we like mechanization and technology inputs, services are very human intensive. Okay? And so you cannot produce and exchange those services, even things like telecom and information technology or medicine. There's a limit to which you can do it across the border. And these areas are impacted very heavily, and countries are trying to grapple with it. Okay? Of course, retail, tourism, education, there are several areas which have been massively hit by the COVID-19. And I'm sorry, I didn't plan my presentation well enough. Some of the key issues I've left out. Thank you, ma'am.
Excellent presentation, Doctor. It was really good to know some of the industry perspective that you have shared, and also at the global level, how pandemic has affected multiple countries and also trade as a whole, and giving the snapshot of our Indian economy as a whole. So it was a real good presentation, sir. I just have a few questions, and first question is with the change of the certain industries, like you pointed out that travel and tourism is going down, oil industry is under crisis. Which all possible sunrise industries that you see on global forum?
Can you specify what are the sunrise industries?
As in like which sunrise industries which will stay with us, which will grow eventually? Possibly COVID has given rise to those industries.
Okay, most of those so-called sunrise industries which you're referring to, or industries which benefit as a result of COVID, is those industries which are able to adapt and use a lot of online technology. Okay? But everything has a limit to which you can use. So many experts are estimating that some of these which are able to effectively use online technology and overcome the crisis. For example, in education sector, everything is about adaptability. So there probably be a shift to online courses, but there's a limit to which they can market it and sell it. And tourism, there's a limit to which you can stop it, but it requires. Most important crucial element is all services, products, especially because of the nature of global capitalism and the global economy, is no longer is any good produced by any one country. It's a value chain and the multiplicity of centers. China is a classic telling point. China produces some important elements, but China doesn't produce everything. So the classic example of a Nike shoe that is produced by 100 different places and finally gets marketed and labeled by one country and sold by the States. So because that, even the industries which are benefiting, for example, which will likely to benefit in the short run, which are affected drastically, would be consumer, all the essential goods. If you look at the statistics, it's almost predictable. All agricultural goods, all essential goods upturn. Gold, interestingly, and oil, despite the price fall, there were profits. So basic goods, essential goods, they are stable. But the biggest challenge, and in fact, the biggest beneficiaries would be all those industries and all those countries and all those business players who are able to smartly adapt. Okay, would it be a ruthless Machiavellian type of smartness, cunningness? We wouldn't know. In terms of who they associate to buy with, how would, for example, would they isolate China or would associate more with China? These all, multiple strategies, and I'm not able to pinpoint as to who will be the major beneficiaries. Who plays it smart and use the right strategy will be those industries which will benefit.
Definitely, definitely. So thank you so much, sir. And shall we move ahead to the next presenter? We have Azrin Afrin. So she's the next presenter. Can we go ahead with her presentation? Hello, Azrin.
Hello, ma'am. Good evening, as of my time, to distinguished chair and my fellow researcher and others who is listening is from anywhere in the world. And I would like to thank at first IIC in Nepal and other organizers for organizing such a wonderful conference. And I am Azrin Afrin. As you can see, I'm working as a lecturer at University of Dhaka, which is in Bangladesh. And the title of my paper is different from two of other fellows who actually given a presentation before me. This is impacts of COVID-19 on migration pattern and issues in solving the crisis. So in here, I'm going to mostly focus on the forced migrants and refugees. And at first, I would like to say that as it is an ongoing process, so I have to collect most of my data, at least all of my data in a nutshell from secondary materials. And the purpose of the study is to, at first, to give an overall image or a picture of forced migrants and refugees during this pandemic. And secondly, how governments of approaching countries, the refugee and other, can you hear me? I think my how governments of approaching countries are denying the rights of the migrants and refugees on the name of COVID-19. And lastly, to explain what process can solve the problem, which can discuss and debate. It's just an approach or it's just a recommendation kind of, but we can debate and discuss on those issues. So I have divided my presentation in three parts. In first part, I would like to discuss about the rights of refugee and forced migrants or asylum seekers or any migrants without any status in normal time. And after that, in second part, I will discuss about the issues and solving those crises. And in the last part, I will discuss about the process, how we can solve it, which is just a recommendation kind of. So I'm going to start with part one. As refugee, we all know that according to 1951 Refugee Convention, refugees are people who have fled war, violence, conflict, or persecution and have crossed an international border to find safety in another country. This is a very defined and also protected matter or refugee status, which is stated by international law. But if I talk about the forced migrants, there is no legal definition for them or protection document for forced migrants. Sometimes they actually, the researcher as well as academician and journalist, they all sometimes use forced migrants or refugee interchangeably, which is very distinguished from each other. And recently, European Commission coined for a forced migrant as a person subject to a migratory movement in which an element of coercion exists, including threats to life and livelihood, whether from natural or man-made cause. So they all, whether a refugee, they have their own status or they have their own statute in under 1951 Refugee Convention, and forced migrants, they can ask their right under the principle of non-refoulement, which actually guaranteed that no one should be returned to a country where they would face torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, or punishment and other irreparable harm. This principle applies to all migrants at all times, irrespective of migrants' status. So whether they have any status or not, they can enjoy these basic rights under policy of non-refoulement. And I would like to focus on three objectives of principle of non-refoulement. Objective 8 said that save lives and establish coordinated international efforts on missing migrants, commit search and rescue operation, which I will give detail in my later section. And objective 11, manage borders in co-integrated, secure and coordinated manner, commit to ensure international borders and that all migrants are treated in accordance with international human rights law. And objective 21 said that cooperated in facilitating safe and dignified return and readmission as well as sustainable reintegration. So in short, we can say that forced migrants or any other migrants without having any legal status, they can ask for their rights under the policy of non-refoulement in normal time. But what is happening in present time? The UNHCR High Commissioner in the first part of this year stated that globally we are facing the worst forced displacement crisis since World War II. More than 79 million people have been forcibly displaced because of conflict or war or any kind of conflict. So 26 million refugees, including 26 million refugees. So we can say that this is one of the highest amounts in history, and it is happening in Africa, in Middle East, and also in South Asia. So another important thing is 82% of all refugee hosted countries belong to developing countries. So they are often settled the refugee or the forced migrants or the asylum seekers where they cross the border. They actually often settle into host communities who already are going through the difficulties of fulfilling their own needs. And these areas are mostly remote and they are struggling to obtain jobs and adequate public services. So this is another issue. And as we all know, World Health Organization recommended to prevent COVID-19 to maintain the mostly recommended thing is to maintain physical distance from one another as it is a very transmittable disease. So to make it show, as I'm going to make approaching my second part. So there are some issues relating to this. Like, first of all, to make sure physical distance, countries all over the world, in short or in a broader perspective, they're imposing lockdown. So their own citizens are facing that they cannot enjoy their own right perfectly or in a normal manner. So it is a very far cry to establish the right of refugee in that situation according to many states, and the overall situation actually give us that picture. And the second issue is refugee or migrants at any time of history to any society or to any country are actually considered as non-receivable, or they do not they never try to accept them as their own, or that if they do not get pressure from any other states or any other world organization. So in this pandemic, they have their quote unquote more logical reason to send back those refugee, asylum, or migrants. So this is another issue. And thirdly, if they allow them, then how would they maintain healthcare? As I have said earlier, that 82% of refugee and migrant or forced migrant holding countries are developing countries. So they are struggling to support their own citizens. So it is actually kind of burden for them to take more refugee or forced migrants. And fourth, if not, then those who are actually already approached in the cross-border area, in informal, overcrowded, and underserved transit sites, where they have the most, we can say, the most threats to their health. And a fifth issue is xenophobia and discrimination and feeling of otherness. In everywhere around the world, migrants, those who have the legal status or the working status, as well as the refugee and also the forced migrants, face xenophobia, discrimination, and feeling of otherness, even in normal time. And this pandemic actually weaponized to spread anti-migrant narratives, call for increasing immigration control and reduction of immigrants' rights. So in all over the world, we can see a wave of anti-migrant anti-migrant pattern or anti-migrant narratives. So, and the sixth issue is, same is also applicable for migrants returning home from countries which are heavily affected. So migrants are in a dilemma. In their own country, even they are not acceptable as if they are coming from a country which is most affected. So I'm going to give some example here, what is happening around the world. In East Africa, people seeking safety and trapped at border due to COVID-19 measure, mostly in Horn, East and Central Africa region, which approximately hold 4.6 million refugees and asylum seekers, and they have a long tradition of receiving asylum seekers from their neighboring countries. And states recently, due to COVID-19, started closing their borders in March as a public health measure to contain the transmittable spread of COVID-19 without safeguards to man, women, or children. So this is a very depressing situation right now. And countries like Burundi, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Somalia closed their borders in March 2020. In Kenya, the borders in Somalia and Tanzania closed on 16 May. And they have actually gone one step further. Asylum seekers and refugees who cross into Kenya are sometimes arrested and returned to the border point of entry, which this measure is actually contravened with international refugee law by denying people in need of international protection. And they also violate the principle of non-refoulement, as I have said earlier, that which prohibits states from turning our people at a border and returning them to a country where they would be at risk of persecution or danger. Here, the only exception happened in Uganda, who allowed DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo's 10,000 displaced people to enter, but they play a double standard game, like they allow DRC citizens to enter, but they did not open up for South Sudanese people. So the regional organization, as well as the world organizations and UNHCR, are also asking them to consider this issue. Defroch Monchena, who is Amnesty International Director for East and Southern Africa, said, while countries in the region are faced with a genuine public health emergency, government with support from international partners must find solution that respects international human rights and refugee law commitments, including the rights to seek asylum. So this is not only happening in Africa. If we look at Mediterranean Sea, the last day I have read that almost 400 people are floating around the sea in the rescue vessel, which is not actually very much protected from virus or do not have any uh, health facility. They even contain many pregnant women, which is very risky for them to hold on that unhealthy kind of vessel, and as they are mostly um, goods or kind of business vessel. So UNHCR and IOM are asking them to consider those migrants or asylum seekers or refugees to enter the port and then make them 14 days to follow the whole procedure of 14 and quarantine. This is also another problem for the rescue vessels crew and those who are actually on the ship and rescuing those persons, because they also have to maintain 14-day quarantine, which is very difficult for them, and that is also making the whole process more complicated. And I am reaching the last part of my presentation, and here why we need to ensure the rights of refugee migrants and forced migrants. If we just look at in a humanitarian and international human rights law, or on that consideration, that that should be done on the humanitarian grounds. And if we look more logically, then COVID-19 is a very transmittable disease. We cannot overcome anyone from any country without despite any kind of citizenship or age or gender. Anyone can affected from the virus. So if the world leader or the authority do not consider those refugees or do not take those refugees under the protection umbrella, then they could be the potential virus carrier. And from but if one person left, then from that particular person, it could transmit to other persons. So that is why it's so important to ensure their rights. And what can we do to ensure their rights? We can approach the basic right-based approach, human right-based approach, which actually plans, policies, and programs are anchored in a system of rights and corresponding obligation established by international law. It especially gives focus on marginalized people. Like right-based approach, everybody have their own right. If we make sure in our plans, or if countries make sure in their plans, policies, and programs, then it will be easy for everyone to overcome the situation or to introduce those programs. And at the same time, whole of government approach, which is actually require leadership and multi-sectoral approaches, like the government as well as the private sector, the public sector, and also international NGOs. All of them can came across include to solve these problems. And whole of government level, including health in all policies and whole of government approaches, like health problems or healthcare should focus on whole of government policies. At the same time, whole of society approach, which means role played by all relevant stakeholders, including individual, civil society, academia, media, voluntary association, and private sector industry in support of national efforts. So if we can maintain, or if we can follow this procedure, I think it would be a very tremendous and a very effective way to establish the rights of refugee, migrants, and forced migrants. So my presentation is just, I have come to the end of my presentation. And again, I would like to say that I actually give the presentation based on forced migrants and refugee, as the whole migrants can also divide it in various sectors. I did not mention all of them. Thank you, Chair, for letting me.
Thank you so much, Professor Azrin. It was a real good presentation from your side. And migration issue has been something which has been there for like
Sorry,
almost
I cannot hear you.
Is it audible now? Is it
It's
audible?
audible, but its sound is very low, so I'm having difficulty.
Okay, is it audible now?
I'm
Okay.
having some difficulty with my device, but you can continue. I'm hearing you.
Okay, so very good presentation, and I must congratulate you to take up such a bold topic, which has been an issue for worldwide, which has been an issue worldwide for almost like over 50 or 100 years possibly. And of course, the issue of migration has been escalated further with the COVID coming in, where each country is trying to seal their borders. So yes, a lovely topic, and you put in a lot of efforts in understanding various parameters with respect to migrations, refugee, the health aspects of refugee people. So that's a lovely presentation that you had. I just have a one question to you is what would be your possibly solution or maybe suggestion or maybe a recommendation to a global body which is working on refugees and migration issues to look at this issue as such? What would be one recommendation from your side?
Okay. Yes, I got your question, but as I have said, I have difficulties in my device, so I am just letting my voice go on, and I have put on the camera in offline. So my recommendation to the world body is to ensure the right-based, to actually establish the right-based approach that everybody has their own right. Whether it's time of pandemic or whether it is normal, it should be applicable without considering the situation, because that person, if, as I have said earlier, if one person left behind, then the all of the humanity can have the chance of getting the virus again. So the world body should maintain this, all of these things very strictly. And at the same time, if we just look at the lockdown situation, we know that lockdown curve all of our rights, some rights. We cannot go properly outside, which there are very, they actually cut to many of our basic rights. So that is also applicable for the migrants. But at the same time, if we do not give their rights to them without considering the present situation, it's not like if we can have the vaccine, we are not getting it from anywhere else. We should think of the whole world as a global village or the one united body to ensure the overall situation or to overcome this situation. So what I'm trying to say is to, I would recommend to establish or go by with right-based approach, human rights-based approach.
Okay, thank you, Azrin. So we had good presentations today. And just to sum up what we have done today, first speaker for today was Ms. Bansari Kamdar. And something which catched my attention from her presentation is something called C-session, which is like she getting into some kind of recession. So C-session is something that is peculiar from our study. And I think we all have a role to understand how perhaps women in workforce are facing challenges. Second speaker for today, we had Mr. Rozaria, Dr. Rozaria, and he spoke of world trade and issues with respect to world trade. And one of the interesting things that he has spoken about is the Ministry of Finance uh, directives and a lot of observations that he has put forward. So thank you very much, Dr. Rozario. And the third speaker that we had today is Ms. Azrin. And she has talked about human-based or right-based approach, which is more of a holistic and inclusive in nature. So I think we have had three important issues with respect to COVID and how it's affecting our world as a whole. which is talking about unemployment and employment women issues per se, migration, which is another big time issue. And again, everything boils down on economy and global growth, and therefore the world trade as a whole. So that was a lovely presentations. And I must thank Dr. Pramod Jaiswal, Director NICE, and Dr. Rausai Bavaskar, Director WPC, for getting me on this panel. I mean, it's been a lovely experience to be here with you all. And it's a lot of learning for me as well. So thank you so much for the panel members also to be a part of it. So anything, what's the next process, Shreya and Paki, if you can tell me?
Ma'am, if I may just answer your question which you asked me.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's okay, if you permit.
Yeah.
This is, you asked me about the sunrise industries. Of course, almost all of them are sunrise industries, so I'm going to list it. This is actually taken from a European scholar. He says these are the industries which will benefit as a result of COVID, and you will notice that they're all tech related. Okay, health related, but health tech related. So med tech, medical tech, especially imaging and diagnosis, diagnostics, and then education technology, e-commerce, transport, especially e-enabled logistics. Then, of course, these are not e-enabled, which is packaging and food processing. They are already sunrise industries. Then what is called as over-the-top services. In relation to that, there's video conferencing, gaming, esports, robotics, cyber security. Then again, technology related, immersive technologies such as augmented reality and virtual reality. Then a lot of animation is going to be used in education and in marketing and so on and so forth. Insurance, because everyone is scared of it, right? And then surveillance. In a healthy kind of way, because governments are going to use that to track, trace the people affected. Thank you.
So nice of you, Dr. Paul. It's like within a short span of time, you actually put down so many things, looked for the study also. I mean, yes, as you mentioned, perhaps technology is going to be next oil, and it's going to be across all platforms, be it education, be it business, be it healthcare, be it travel and tourism. Everywhere and anywhere, we will be talking about more of technology, be it AI, AR, or VR. That's blockchain. All of this will be dominating our industries tomorrow. So thank you very much, sir. And
do we have any more time left with us? We have the session till 2:45, right? Yeah, so ma'am, I had a couple of questions, if you don't mind. May I ask them? I noted them down during the first two presentations that were given up.
sure.
Am I audible?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I've been studying gender studies. I'm a student of bachelor's in international relations although. But one of the things that I have been really curious about is that during war, usually the country witnesses a baby boom. So what do you think, is India prepared for such a situation? Because in the lockdown, women are obviously locked down with the abusers, right? And they are being sexually exploited. They are being, physically involved with men. So what do you think India will be able to tackle a situation? And because if you look at the country, the cases are rising. So if anyone could just take on this question. Yeah, you may go ahead.
Sure. So you raise a good point about just being locked up with their oppressors or abusers, but also there's also this other problem of women not having access to healthcare during this time, because some places are still locked down, and during lockdown, again, like they've not had access to any sort of preventative care. And that is going to be also another issue when it comes to like what you're talking about, this sort of like baby boom or something. So it's not just going to be just the fact that they have no way to leave their abusers. It's also going to be the fact that they cannot access And particularly because like even now when the lockdown has been lifted, a lot of healthcare resources have been diverted completely towards COVID, and which is again like an urgent problem. So it makes sense, but that's also going to be something that we're going to have to see about how our public healthcare infrastructure now takes on a lot of these other health issues. Like because we're now like there's a lot of other health diseases that we are neglecting because of what is happening with COVID. So that's going to be a major concern too, with like the fertility stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. But on a very positive outlook, I also think that the impact on childcare has been widened in this case. Because if you look at the case of working women, they had been going out working and the child was somewhere or the other neglected. But at this particular point of time, I think that the childcare has improved. All of you focused on women, in the first two presentations. But it would have been really great to see an insight on the third gender as well, because I feel that they are the ones who are being more ignored than women. So would you mind just providing an insight on that? Because as far as I feel, I can only go to the negative side, because they are the ones who have lost their jobs. We could witness them in the trains, we could witness them in the celebrations, but right now they don't have anything. They are not the ones who are being employed easily. So what can the policies be possibly taken by the government, and what can we do at our personal level to improve the status of the transgender community or the third gender? So anyone?
I could take part of that question. I don't have like the policy answer to it because I've not studied it in as much detail. But one of the other things, like, again, like, sorry to bring in all the negatives at this point. As you said, like there have been some positives that like the childcare has improved and men and women are both taking responsibility now. At least like there's greater responsibility to by men. When it comes to the third gender and like that issue, like not only is it that they're losing employment, but they're going back into houses and families where they are facing, where there is a chance that they will face violence. Because again, like it's a very, it is a cultural issue where like it's also very unsafe for a lot of people in these households, and they have no other option but to go back to these households because they've lost their jobs, or because they just, that is where they're locking down, or that's where they're stuck at that moment. So staying with these families, their own family, is also like going to be a greater, like for some is going to be a risk of violence inside families. So that's also something we need to look at when it comes to third gender or like other sexualities, other than other genders and sexualities other than men and women.
Can I just add on some pointers here?
So, ma'am, definitely you're the chair.
Definitely, you have.
Right. See, I believe there is a lot of stigma attached with the third gender as a whole. The society has not evolved yet to accept them into a routine, regular societal norms. So I think as a whole society, at least I know for India, many other countries may have much more positive outlook towards them. But as a society, we need to evolve. And there has to be a lot of efforts put in from the government side also, and global bodies also, that they are also a part of our family, they are also part of our society, and let's accept the third gender as they are. And therefore there has to be a lot of social awakening which has to take place. And to have that social awakening will happen only and only when we have more of a like awareness campaigns which are done, more and more involvement campaigns which are done. We have specific additional facilities provided to them, which means that if they are also educated, they know about world, possibly people will also look, look forward to these kind of people in our communities. So therefore it's more of like a societal change which I believe has to be there. And to drive that change, there is a huge role which each of the government should play. There has to be like the way we have societies for underprivileged children, maybe the old age people, we have people for health and hygiene. Let's have a community which will drive their interests. So have a community which is driving their interests at government level, we are pushing it. And then of course there are a lot of NGOs which support this cause. So let's get those into board. At the same time, at the professional or corporate level, they should be opening doors for them. So it's like a multi-pronged decision process which has to be taken into place. That's what my thoughts on this question is.
No, definitely. Like you raised an important point of multiple stakeholders in every single like aspect of these lives of their lives.
Right.
Exactly, ma'am, especially in the case of healthcare sector, because a person, for example, if you're a woman, you would definitely like to go to a female doctor because you'd be more comfortable in talking to her and discussing your issues. So we should have more doctors who are belonging from that community, as far as I believe. And one of my last second questions, I feel, the question is that when you look at the issue of gender and employment on the international realm, and take the country example of Belarus. So over there, education is obviously compulsory till the secondary or tertiary level. 100% boys and girls are enrolled in schools. 68% boys post school join vocational training, while more than that, while more than 68% of women do join universities to increase their qualification, and they are the ones who are dominating the healthcare education sector and the social science sectors. And as we can see that the labor task is obviously going to reduce, be it in the COVID era or in the post-COVID era. So do you think that in the country, men will be in a more vulnerable state because education and healthcare will definitely be growing? So what would you think about that?
What do you mean by when men will be in a more vulnerable state? Because I was a little confused by that.
Okay, so because they'll be the ones who will be losing on their jobs. This is what I think, because the labor sector will be reduced. Vocational training involves a lot of labor sector. So do you think that the gender gap, what do you think about the gender gap?
In Belarus or?
Yeah, in Belarus.
That is going to be, so like, it depends on the recession, right? Like, so as, for example, this is a she session, but with like, there's a prediction that it will be affecting women more, but the 2008-2009 financial crisis affected men more. Men disproportionately lost more jobs around that time. So it depends on like how the occupations are segregated in each country. Like, and occupational segregation is huge, and there's a lot of negatives to occupational segregation in itself, where like, there has been a lot of research on how when occupations are segregated and when by gender, women are paid less in occupations that are considered female occupations, female dominated occupations. Think about nurses. And when occupations are segregated by, like when occupations are considered more masculine, women and men are paid more. So that's the thing, like it's also just the occupation and like who's a majority in that occupation will also determine this gender gap. And it, again, like that gender gap and like who is in that occupation will depend on the country and the way it has developed and how its policies are.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is that all of us know that the tourism industry has been facing breakdown, and it's not going to improve in any 1 or 2 years as of now. But do any one of you think of people coming to revenge vacations and the tourism industry again flourishing after 1 or 2 years, or will it be like the present situation when we're not in a situation to talk to anyone, we don't feel like talking? So will it be confined? Will we be confined to ourselves in our homes, or will we be going to revenge vacations and flourishing the tourism industry?
Just to add on, I mean, parking is a very good question. And honestly speaking, I mean, the skepticism is huge currently. I mean, people are scared to the core, saying that possibly we may not want to travel abroad. But what will happen today, possibly, which I believe may happen, is another 6 months again. I mean, depending on different countries' level and which stage they are. But largely from the peak or maybe flattening of your curve of COVID-19, for another 6 months also, people may not travel abroad, or people may not want to take a risk of traveling much. But this will surely help in terms of domestic tourism. So domestic tourism should take up this opportunity and ensure that they have like door-to-door services provided, and also adding on to the insurance part of it. Like people are today scared that if I travel, say from India to France, and I get COVID, what will happen to me? So what should be as a part of it is for domestic tourist companies or domestic tourist destination should equip themselves so well that they use this opportunity to get more tourism. This will help in terms of individual country to grow on their own itself, rather than being dependent on the foreign tourist arrivals. Second possible thing, after possibly 6 months time, when we see possibly there is a comparatively lesser risk and we may have vaccine by that time, people will travel again. Only thing is the travel will come with a lot of ifs and buts. So those ifs and buts have to be addressed by the tourism companies, which we may be possibly the guarantee of payment back in case something happens again. It could be possibly the insurance that you are attaching with it. It should be like, if something happens, the company should be able to take up or the country should be well equipped to take up the charge of those forest tourist arrivals. So from what I believe with respect to consumer behavior, we all are going through a lot of anxiety and stress. And given an opportunity, each one of us would like to go out for a vacation, because we are so stressed at home, because with the work from home, work at home, and so many other responsibilities. So possibly there is a latent need for people to travel, to go for a holiday or a vacation for that matter. It's only that the skepticism has to be taken care of to ensure that people will again travel back, at least domestically. That's what my take is.
Yes.
Ma'am, can I respond to some of the points, or you have some more questions?
Sure, definitely, sir.
No, do you want to ask more questions, ma'am?
I don't have more questions. Shreya, do you have any?
Okay.
So ma'am, like apart from the travel and tourism industry, I think the same goes for the automobile industry also. People who are in the better place are still affording cars because they know it's not safe to travel to public transport. But middle class people who are already dodging between their salaries due to lockdown and work from home, I think they are not being able to afford that private transport, and somewhere the other place the automobile industry is dodging also between people who can afford and people who cannot afford. And while we're thinking that we might not be safe, it might not be safe enough to travel abroad, there are still people who are traveling in their private cars. Like there are people who are traveling. Like I know a relative of mine traveling from Calcutta to Patna via car. So in that case, I think people who are already better off and own a vehicle for themselves, they are still a bit careless on the part of of somewhere or the other, providing a boost to the automobile industry. But I think even that is taking a toll, because as it is, most of the people in the lockdown, they're not going out. Okay, and the people who are forced to go because they have to earn the bread. I think that's a very, very sad part where we are seeing a major economic depression. And even for people, like when you were talking about the women issue and coming to the child issue, I think there are many families that might think of dropping their children from school because probably they will not be able to afford the school fees. Okay, and even now when the schools are running classes through Zoom calls and other social platforms, they're charging the same amount of fees. So there are even families who are not being able to adequately provide that education, or might not be able to in the future, because we are still under this ambiguity as to when the economic conditions or the economic business lines become straightened, and they are being able to earn like in the post-lockdown period. I think that's what I wanted to add. Like it's a major economic depression where especially the middle class families are running into literal depth, and which, considering to the prices of the vegetables, the even the necessary goods, they are so high, they are under the price inflation, and we are not even thinking about luxury products. Even today, like as far as in Calcutta, we have shopping markets, everything open, but people hardly go and visit. But they're still there. The rent is still being paid. The salaries and the wages to the people are still being paid. And even the products, they might enter into their liquidation date, and they might have to sell it in the much lower price. So I think it's a really tense situation that needs to be, it's a worrying situation for everyone around. I think it's not just the women. I think it's for both children's education, it's for tourism and travel, it's for automobile industries, it's for even small people and small traders and the people who sell food on the streets, because we are very, very cautious about what we need to consume and what we don't need to consume, especially in this period. So that's what a little bit I wanted to point out when everybody was talking about the different sectors.
Yeah, very good point, Shreya. And in fact, you rightly pointed out, it's the small time traders who have actually affected a lot. In fact, the business community as a whole, not like we're not talking about the league business people, but the majority of small time businesses have been suffering because the retail shops were not open. Perhaps people are not going to retail shops. With all of this, yes, of course, I mean, this pandemic has taken us back to maybe 10 years back where we were. And in terms of a lot of people have also got the salary cuts also. So with all of this, yes, it's a economically recessive session for all of us as a whole. But having said this, we must always, I believe that possibly being positive and being optimistic in every possible thing is will drive the innovation, will drive possibly we all coming out of the situation much positively. So as an individual also and at our institution level also, we believe that each kind of crisis gives us an opportunity to move ahead. So therefore, I think adapting to these situations and trying to find out new opportunities is one of the important solutions. I mean, look at the education sector as a whole. I mean, we were talking about the physical classes, we were talking about getting students on board. Everything today, within a span of 5 months or maybe 4 months also, we moved on the online platforms. And we are doing tremendously well with the same kind of set of people, with same set of things virtually. So, I mean, it's like looking for opportunities within the given segments. Like, see, a lot of companies also, for that matter, I will cite some of the examples from India. And see the companies like Amul, they've changed the atmosphere altogether. I mean, they have used this opportunity to launch new product. Look at ITC. They've actually used this opportunity. So, I mean, it's always everything that happens in the world has got two sides. It's always that what best we can make out of it. So that's my take personally.
I think the same goes for the fitness industries. I think people have been very, very concentrated about their health, about the kind of lifestyle that they're living. They're shifting towards more natural products, and these gym industries and, the trainers, I think that people are even paying during this time through e-banking and transfer. I think fitness industry is doing really, really well. I think it's got a great boost, because I think today everyone wants to have good health, because pandemic comes with another byproduct that's called immunity boosting. Yes. And I think people are all into getting fit, and that's why they're hiring trainers. They're even ready to pay 5K 10K over online platform.
Perfect.
I think even that,
just to add on, there is an app called CureFit. I mean, you might be knowing. They have actually transformed the way people work out. And one single session, you would have something like 1,500 people joining. And yeah, fairly well. I mean, they wouldn't have done that with the physical gyms. And that's the kind of support that they are getting. So, I mean, it's absolutely using the opportunity in a right frame. Look at how Mukesh Ambani and Reliance has used this as a perfect opportunity to get in a lot of money in. So that's again a wonderful thing that we look at. Look at how Swiggy changed. I mean, Swiggy Genie is another beautiful example of product extension. So, I mean, there are a lot of opportunities that we can unendingly discuss about. So.
Ma'am, even I think on Instagram, I think today you will see in every nook and corner, there are some or the other bloggers working so creatively. I think the creative industry has also art and craft skills and people are all getting into the different skill apps like Coursera, EDX, then Skillshare. Even that's being opted so much. People are taking online courses to learn new things. I think it's a great boost for Skill India project, because people are actually now
Absolutely.
thinking of doing something apart from what their vocational or curriculum demands. I think even that's a very, very positive aspect of being in a pandemic and working on self development.
Absolutely, absolutely. Rightly pointed out.
Ma'am,
Sir, doctor, you had some
yeah,
things to share.
yeah, if I may, of course, it's such a
Yes.
education to listen to such beautiful, I mean, comments and very enlightened participation. Of course, I'm very amazed and impressed by
Thank
having
you.
such a knowledgeable chair,
Oh,
management
thank you so
expert. You
much.
speak on so many things. Thank you, ma'am. So I just have some very basic points since Raki ma'am mentioned about war. Now, in war and conflict situations,
I'm a little particular with my name and Paki, not Raki.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Sorry,
CATH.
sorry, ma'am. Yeah. So, Paki, ma'am, children, women, and vulnerable are always at the receiving end, and especially in relation to rape and murder of women, it goes back many, thousands of years. One is a kind of posturing. You make the victim, you kill them, and show that a sign of masculinity or power. And there's also this unfortunate association of self-identity that you are feeling very threatened and weak, and so therefore you take on somebody who's weaker. So it's also was manifest in the Vietnam syndrome, where you have the 6 feet American. He's just very scared, but then he goes and brutalizes, or and then of course it also was repeated in Kashmir. You find the kind of rape and victimization of girls in Kashmir, done both by the terrorists and by the police forces. It's all about this, about if it's psychological and sociological and so on and so forth. Okay. On the question of third gender, of course, I hope you people will not assassinate me. It's just a point I'm mentioning. Of course, you have the expert, ma'am, can clarify. It's just a thought. In the work marketplace, of course, Deepa ma'am would probably agree with me. The global marketplace is looking for people with skill sets. Okay, they're not looking for genders or caste, etc. I know the understanding, the stigma and the caste and the class factors do play a significant role. But if you have a skill set and you're able to sell something to somebody, the world is moving towards that. For example, in a masked world where you don't have to speak and you just have to deliver, third gender has a significant role. I mean, they could be in a series of industries. Their face and identity is not needed in e-tech sources, industries. So we probably need to give them education and employment in the first place, but and many of them are multi-talented. Okay, unfortunate lives that they live. So this is just my point on that. And on the tourism, of course, Deepa ma'am has covered it so much. The whole question of that, you must be able to adapt. Now, even tourism, if tourism industry is very clear, they're already doing it in Kenya and Tanzania. You see, the wildlife in tourism industry is not going to be affected. Okay, especially if you have a private car, and if you can let people, foreigners, go across the border, drive through. And for example, in China and Singapore, there's a kind of a bubble agreement that if you, which we're also doing it now in India, for you get tested, you give a certification, self-certification, then you get tested again, and so on and so forth. Thousands of tourists can travel, have the joys of the wildlife, and then go back. And this can be done several places. And this will aid self-help industries. Already, tourism industry in the West, you can hire your own cars and you can travel. So you don't have to, contact anything. And many things, food and packaging industry develops. You can travel long distances without having to stay in a hotel or motel, etc. And these are things which the tourism industry will adapt to. Okay, everything can be done online. You go to the source and you come back safely. Only that you cross international borders, for which governments have to facilitate this. And which is why WTO is just begging governments, please open borders. I mean, you give all the restrictions, but if they fulfill the restrictions, let them go through. Then, of course, this idea about the automobile industry going in doldrums, it is true. It happened even before COVID. It accentuated with the COVID. But you see, the opportunity now it leaves is that if you can drive a car, or if you can drive a plane or a jet or a helicopter, the inventiveness is that they will make such modes of transport available for people at a reasonable rate. the standard logic of more the demand, there will be the supply, and you can reduce the price. So it is going to be, unfortunately, a very self-help word. Yeah. So it is possible. I'm just saying it's quite a possibility. Bear with me. Any
Thank you so for enlightening all of us. It's been a pleasure over here. Ma'am, I guess we'd have to end our session over here because the other session has to be prepared.
Definitely, definitely. Certainly. Thank you so much, everyone. Paki and Shreya, you've been a great support to me. And the questions that you actually asked stimulated the entire discussion. So thank you so much for being the part of like thought-provoking persons for this session.
They should present the papers.
Yes. Also thank to Bansari, Dr. Rozario and Azrin. All of you have put in a real great efforts in making the papers, also sharing the inputs with us. Presentation by Bansari was really good. I mean, some of the statistics were eye-opening for all of us. So that's lovely to have all of your presentations. So we have few audiences also. So that's lovely to have so many audiences for our presentation. Thank you, everyone. And lastly, and most importantly, thank you, NICE and WPC for giving this opportunity to me. Thank you so much. That's from my side.
Thank you, ma'am.
Shreya, you may proceed with the word of thanks. It would be great.
Distinguished chair speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of the session, I take great honor in proposing the vote of thanks on behalf of NICE to all who have graced us with their presence and contributed their parts to make this event a resounding success. We would like to express our profuse gratitude and sincere thanks to Dr. Deepa Rohit Kamat for agreeing to chair and moderate this session today. Our sincere thanks goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such a comprehensive and convincing presentation. We would like to acknowledge and gratitude to all our friends from diplomatic community, the experts, the academia, the media, and different organizations. Finally, I must also mention our deep sense of appreciation for the audience who participated in this webinar, those who are watching us live on YouTube channels. Thank you for your valuable time and attention and for making the session so productive with all your questions. We are truly honored to have you all with us this evening. Hope to stay connected with you for the future as well. It's been a great pleasure listening to each one of you. Also, we have the next session. Please do join, and thank you for your great enlightening everything that happened here. Thank you so much to each and every one of you.